Welcome back to Conversations of the Leaky Cauldron, Episode 6 on Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Chapters 24, Rita Skeeter's Scoop, 25, The Egg in the Eye, and 26, The Second Task. And back with me, as usual, are my esteemed colleagues, Miss Sarah Miller, Mr. Wesley Schantz. Welcome back, you two.
Yo, good to be back. Happy Martin Luther King Day.
Happy MLK Day.
Yes, greetings.
Greetings, and because of him, we can meet a little bit early today, and without all the other wonderful things he's done, that too is yet another wonderful thing that his good influence has pushed into the future, which is now our present. So, speaking of the present, where do y'all want to start today? Rita Skeeter and her scoop on our giant Hagrid friend, our feelings towards Cedric Diggory and his very poor clue that we still had to figure out ourselves with this this egg that we have to put underwater, or the second task where we find out the true feelings of each of our champions and, what drives them and motivates them at the core. What were y'all thinking?
I guess I was thinking probably with Rita Skeeter, just since she reminded me, I guess a few things reminded me of book 2 in this one, but she did because she's another writer, like Gilderoy Lockhart is a writer, and I'm always sort of interested in that. And we see here some of her sort of methods coming through, although it's still a bit mysterious how she got this scoop. She's more than happy to just like wreck people's lives.
Yeah, in both cases, her and Lockhart sort of seem to embellish the truth. Like, you don't really get examples of writers who are honest, which I guess is sort of strange now that you bring that up. But the two best-selling writers we've met are people who have a difficult relationship with the truth or with their role in it, or, maybe manipulate other people's stories for their own personal gain, which is interesting.
Well, that just makes me think of sort of even the broader theme that we come up with, which is people's inability to wrangle with the truth and to accept it, because we'll see, especially at the end of this book and bleeding into the beginning and the major events of the next one, that even the Ministry of Magic is unwilling to face the truth. So it's interesting that you two bring that up, because it makes me almost wonder, because I was paying very close attention to how Rita Skeeter is described this time around, and it's even said that she has an acid green dress on, and I think an acid green pin as well. It's described as acid, something that is corrosive, that eats away at you. And with the idea being that she is, there's an adjective we have for describing somebody as especially mean and sharp, vitriolic, based on actual acid that can be thrown onto your face. In fact, there's a Sherlock Holmes story about somebody's face being ruined by vitriol being thrown onto it. And so I was wondering if you were starting to also see sort of a tension between Albus Dumbledore and Harry Potter and what Hogwarts is, and then sort of the public at large, represented by the journalist Rita Skeeter, and the sort of reading populace reading Gilderoy Lockhart, and the lack of acceptance by the Minister of Magic of the coming of evil. Whether there is actually a tension between those, whether there's like a faction within the wizarding world that just straight up does not want to face the truth. And perhaps that is what she and Gilderoy and the Ministry are catering to, almost as if they're more propaganda than they are seekers of truth.
Absolutely. I mean, well, in her mind, she is telling the truth, right? Or at least she's convinced herself that that's what she's doing. And she does seem to sort of parade that with her appearance. Like, she's very loud. Her appearance is very loud, and her voice is very loud. And her stories scream with all sorts of evocative details, right? Some of which are stretching, right? But she, from her perspective, I think would say, right, she's getting this story out there in a way that people are going to be able to hear it, and whatever she's done that isn't quite honest, it's all in service of that end, which I think for her is the important thing, right? That people find out what is going on at Hogwarts. And like you say, Hogwarts does seem to be a sort of a different place maybe than the wizarding world at large. It's a elite selective institution. And Harry Potter and Dumbledore are elite, unique sorts of wizards. They seem not to really represent maybe a lot of the readership of the Rita Skeeters, of the Gilderoy Lockharts. So I guess this takes me back again to Ron Weasley's family. There, in some way, right? His mom was Gilderoy Lockhart, so maybe that's the closest thing, and he seems to know a lot about the wizarding world and like what's common sense there. So he's kind of our best, I think, example of the kind of average wizard that we've really seen.
Yeah, well, I think we hear about it in these chapters, so maybe it's in the future. I did read ahead, but not only is Molly, was she a big fan of Gilderoy Lockhart, she's also a really big fan of Rita Skeeter, or at least a consumer of her articles, and like of the magazine for which she writes and the newspaper and all of that. And yeah, there is a sense in which I think Hogwarts is, it's full of towers and whatnot, but it's also like maybe a good analogy would be like the White Tower in the real world. That like, oh, it's all well and good to go pursue truth in the safe space of a university, but this is the real world, and maybe truth is a luxury, or is not always, like, doesn't always have the same currency in an environment, particularly one in which, like, it's not culturally, already the wizarding world operates in kind of with a value of like obscurity for the sake of comfort, or for the sake of like personal safety. Like they don't speak about things as they are, right? Voldemort has a bunch of names that he goes by, and there's things about the past that you don't speak about, and there is kind of a cultural preference for obscuring the truth to the degree to which it's inconvenient. Now, to me, I think Rita Skeeter, I don't know, I don't see her as a seeker of truth. I think she seeks fame the same way that Lockhart does, but maybe she sees fame differently. Maybe she wants to be of service to the greater world by exposing the truth at Hogwarts or whatever. But I don't know, she misses the mark so like widely, and twists the truth so much with that little quick quotes quill. But it'd be, I don't know. But the wider wizarding world seems already predisposed to believe any story that someone in a position of relative power and influence is ready to give them, because they don't want to be scared. Whereas I think maybe at Hogwarts, maybe because of Dumbledore, fear is less of a deterrent to the truth.
Yeah. And that's so interesting, because it makes me almost wonder whether what she's offering as a writer and what the ministry offers is sort of a false sense of security, and also maybe a false sense of superiority. Because it strikes me that people who become very famous as writers and as entertainers often occupy a niche, and they make people feel in a certain way consistently. Like the people that would have listened to Alex Jones, generally they want to listen to somebody that makes them feel smarter than that person. And that's what they're always going to get, given the quality of his show and like how he presents himself, which I would say is quite the opposite from what we present. But what Rita Skeeter presents is, what she does is she takes people down, right? She takes out Dumbledore, who I've actually explicitly said is the symbol for a god, which is a very interesting cultural commentary now, because of course many people speak against, like, say, the notion of God, often citing the foibles of those who practice religion as reason, which is poor reasoning. But again, the sort of reasoning you would expect from somebody untrained in reasoning. So it's interesting that both of you are so fair about how you describe Rita. When I read her, she so clearly is motivated to write things in such a way that it's hard for me to admit that she is anything other than a yellow journalist. But it does seem like what you are hitting on with her is that she's providing the people with what they want, rather than, and I think, and you can tell me whether you think this is correct, rather than what a newspaper newspaper reporter is supposed to do, which is to give a correct perspective on the situation that helps somebody to understand the situation in a way that makes them actually safer, even if they don't feel safer. Like, for instance, she should be, when Voldemort comes back around, talking about the fact that he's there because that can keep you from dying rather than keeping you from feeling like you're going to die, which then results in you dying anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I in no way want to defend her. I think that there's a market that she serves, right? Like, she fulfills a demand, just like Lockhart fulfilled a demand. I mean, they're not without blame. People who twist the truth for their own profit. I mean, aren't they somewhere in Dante's like eighth, not in the ninth, but they're in the eighth circle. Yes. They're people who pander. I mean, I know that's not how he meant pandering, but I mean, in a way, they're pimping out the truth. But I think that they exist. I mean, take this out of the Wizarding World context and put it into ours, right? Like, take the news media as it stands today, right? Like, yes, they are, when people report stories that are deliberately designed to make them more ad money through ridiculous titles and clicks, like, yes, the editors and the editorial staff and the system that makes money off of that is the problem, but so is the fact that they know that will work, right? So, like, they're to blame because they perpetuate a system off which they make money, because there's a culture there, like there's a much deeper problem, and they are part of it, but they're also a symptom of it. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but it seems like that's something that is true about our primary world that is also true in the Wizarding world. That, yeah, I think I like the word yellow. Like, she's coward. She's selfish. And she's way off the mark, right? Anybody who genuinely looks at Hogwarts and thinks that the real threat is Hagrid is not looking clearly, right?
Yeah. Right.
And I guess it also makes me think of this great kind of plot line in the Aaron Sorkin show called The Newsroom, where the main character wants to basically like clean up journalism and bring the morality back into, delivering the news. And he's dating this woman who is a gossip columnist, and it's just going terribly because she's like writing these takedown pieces for the equivalent of like People magazine or something like that. And he lays into her about like, you are killing like everything that he was trying to do, which is like elevate the news watching population and like bring back civil discourse and make the news about facts and truth so that you're ready to go to the ballot box as a voter and like equip citizens with the data that they need to make a good decision. And she's just like, he calls her like basically poison. And it's a very funny scene, and it's Aaron Sorkin, so it's brilliantly written with like too many adjectives. But they, anyway, the point is like, I think that is what she is. That she's wearing like this acrid yellow and green is exactly right. But there is unfortunately like, she has a pretty powerful place. So what does that say about a society where that's the kind of truth that they prefer, or that's the kind of so-called truth that they prefer? It's not good, right? It's like that there is evil in the world, but there are also the conditions that make evil grow.
Right. Right. I can totally agree that she is symptomatic of that, which would allow Voldemort to return, because people are turning their faces from the real truth in order to see only the negatives in others, rather than in themselves or the real problems in society. And sorry, Wes, didn't mean to jump in there too fast.
You guys are too quick sometimes. I was just going to say, it's kind of interesting too how when Hagrid takes his leave of absence here to kind of weep off by himself, the substitute teacher who comes in, Professor Grubbly Plank, actually gives like a pretty great lesson, right? And it's about the opposite of darkness and evil. Kind of interestingly, right? The unicorn symbol comes back here, and I thought that was kind of a cool like counterpart to the kinds of creatures Hagrid's been showing them. I thought that was kind of the main point, maybe, was just a contrast there, and how everyone like immediately loves the unicorn because it's so, beautiful, splendid compared to the blast-ended scroots they've been handling for the whole year. So I thought that was kind of odd, like a little thing that I didn't remember that well, I guess, but kind of struck me as we were reading this time, because that unicorn, I mean, that's important.
Well, let me ask you two things about that, and I'll extend this also to Sarah too, because I was pretty interested in that too, because how I read that was sort of like how you become attached to teachers who you really like as people sometimes, and you are willing to give them the benefit of the doubt as a student. But then when you're exposed to a different teacher with a different teaching methodology, often they have plenty of great things to offer you too, like A, unicorn, very hard to catch, obviously talented person. B, knows her stuff, knows that unicorns are easier to touch or prefer to be touched by women rather than men, which I thought was an interesting further comment on the differentiation of the genders as we go through this series, that there is an actual, written into the secondary world, major, or difference between who can handle these creatures with ultimate care. And so as if she's now bringing a feminine touch to care of the magical creatures too, whereas obviously Hagrid is more like an engineer or mad scientist, because we find out that the blast-ended scroots are actually a hybrid that he's created, which is very interesting because that expands the theme on himself being a hybrid and us realizing that, and himself loving dragons, which are a hybrid creature, reptile plus bird, and hippogriffs, which are horse plus eagle, also a hybrid creature. And the unicorn is, of course, a hybrid, just like Grubbly Plank has a hybrid name, 2 names. But I was wondering if what you saw in that really, Wes, because I saw a lot of that, but I'm not sure, but it sounds sort of like you saw more as well, or that too. What did both of you take from that?
No, I didn't see any of that. Honestly, that's really interesting. I mean, I did sort of pick up on the unicorn being a hit with the girls in particular, right? And one of them does mention how it's so hard to catch them. So they're very impressed by Professor Grubbly Plank's abilities as a teacher, but also as I suppose a magician or a witch, right? It does also have this kind of favoritism, though, which is sort of, again, reversed, right? So they do, like you're saying, they have this liking for Hagrid. They might sort of blind them to some of his flaws, and she has got a liking or a preference, it seems, for the female's side of things that she's wanting to bring out in her very first lesson. It's a pretty strong statement. Being a substitute teacher, I don't know if I would go with unicorns on the first class. That's pretty hard, hard line to take.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see the hybrid details or the pattern that you identified, Alex. I think that's really apt. It sort of reminds me of our conversation last week about the ways in which various kinds of new things are acceptable, or new is the wrong word. I'm sorry. Hybrids or creatures with obvious imperfections, or what appears kind of like impurities in the breeding, shall we say, like half muggle witches and wizards, or how those are like far more welcome at Hogwarts, even more so than Beauxbatons, or so it now appears. But I mean, I like what you mentioned though about Harry, their reaction to Grubbly, what's her name, Grubbly Plank? I think I'm getting that wrong.
Yeah, you got it with that Plank.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, like how angry Harry gets over this. Like, he is livid with, I mean, he's in a furious state. He's furious even that Hermione acknowledges that it was a good lesson. He's, it's almost like he's the one who's been raked over the coals by the Rita Skeeter article more so than Hagrid. I mean, Hagrid's clearly the target of this piece, but like, I don't know. I think it's interesting, like how mad he gets at her, and the people who think that the article is okay. I don't know that I have ever had a teacher for whom I would be that mad if someone else came along and did it better. I don't know. It seems like more than teacher student. It seems very like fraternal, or even child parent level of loyalty. I know we've talked sort of about fathers and sons, and the different kinds of fatherhood or fatherly figures that this book presents. I think we'll see that even more, but Hagrid's always been the one to kind of expose him to things that are true, maybe not willingly, maybe reluctantly at times, but I don't know. I think that was the part that struck me about that whole the scoop and their reaction to it.
Well, I agree there's a lot going on there, because the relationship between Harry and Hagrid is sort of undefined. He has sort of said this sort of hermetic, Hermes-like transmitting figure. He takes Harry from one place to another, right? He either takes him from the non-magical world to the magical world, or he takes him from a place of not understanding things to understanding them, or from the civilized, domesticated world of the school out into the dark forest and sort of the in-between, which is the care of the magical creatures place. But I wonder to what extent it's sort of like when somebody likes Rita, or when somebody likes this new professor who is there because of an article by Rita Skeeter, that is like tacit approval of Rita Skeeter and her effect on the world, which is also panning Harry. It's as if he's now feeling himself part of this victimized class of people like Hagrid. That he finds himself like the blast-ended Scroot, this odd hybrid that people don't know the meaning of, that they don't know the use of, and that he's identifying with this, and he's identifying with Hagrid as part of this group of people that have been harmed by Rita Skeeter. And this is starting to really eat at him some, because this isn't, if that's true, that's not something he shares with his friends until Hermione gets panned too.
Well, and he's got some things he's not telling, as usual. He doesn't tell Hagrid that he overheard the conversation that Rita Skeeter apparently somehow also overheard, right? And he doesn't tell anyone that he hasn't actually figured out the egg yet. He keeps letting everyone sort of believe that he's got it figured out, and he has to. It's part of the kind of denouement of this chapter that he decides that, because Hagrid believes in him so much, and he's not being completely upfront with him, that he's got to go ahead and use Cedric's help to figure out this egg thing, because he's got to be the person that Hagrid believes him to be.
Well, let's talk about that some, because, okay, let's get into the second chapter, and let's talk about Harry's feelings towards Cedric, what he has to do in this water with this egg, this very non-intuitive. It reminds me, this very non-intuitive clue, it reminds me quite a bit of playing Final Fantasy VII with you, Wes. Sometimes it's just very unclear what the next step is. And for this challenge, I almost wonder whether part of this Triwizard tournament is that you be a likable enough fellow that people are willing to help you, because it seems like it seems like the whole school is supposed to be behind you if you're the champion, and everybody under the table is supposed to be really trying to help you win, because nobody is, it recalls to me FIFA soccer, right? Nobody's clean, but that's the game. And
hey now.
Or at least what's said publicly about them. In any case, I just wonder if that's also part of the game. There's how it's supposed to be perceived and how it actually is. But even just moving on from that, and perhaps that's not true. I don't follow soccer as well as you do, so you can speak to that if we ever really need to. We're current events. We can spend a whole episode on that. But what also do you think of this second task, and the fact that it's not just your butt on the line, but also your friend, and also instead of a fire task on the ground and in the air, this is a water task below the surface, and there's more at stake. and there's a weird figuring out aspect, just like in the first one. And well, I just want to talk some about this second task and the events leading up to it. Oh, and of course, the odd sexual tension between Moaning Myrtle and Harry in the prefect bathroom. Just can't help but mention
that. Yeah, I think it's, yeah, well, that, plus there's like a really beautiful mermaid in the stained glass window that was apparently like making eyes at Cedric, which is weird. But no, last week I was really interested in why I've been grading Catcher in the Rye papers all day. Why Harry was so willing to give Cedric a hint about the dragons, and yet when Cedric, a boy who everybody says is like super nice and kind, and you know it's hard to find anything wrong with him, when he gives him a hint, Harry is so reluctant to accept it. I find that very strange, or at least noteworthy. And yeah, I think that I noted too, Alex, the water and fire imagery, fire and air, and like being above the land and the water and earth kind of being intertwined in the second task. I think that's interesting, considering that one of the schools like literally got there through the air and one of them got there through the water. And yet in the second task, like neither of them do as well as the other two from Hogwarts, I guess is, I think, interesting. But anyway, yeah, no, I'm curious what you all think about why Harry was so reluctant to accept the help. Is it just that the instructions are kind of weird? Or is it that he doesn't want the answer? Or is it that he just genuinely doesn't trust that Cedric would do something so out of character and lie? I don't know. Cedric's not a Slytherin. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think it's partly his pride won't allow him to take whatever help Cedric has offered him. You know, he wants to figure it out on his own, and the bind of it is that he can't possibly figure it out because Cedric has essentially told him like the answer, right? Like, and he can't even get Cedric's hint. Like, it's not even that. It's like he can't quite understand how this is supposed to be a helpful hint until he gets a further hint from Moaning Myrtle, who essentially just like tells him what to do, right? It's because she's been, as you say, watching Cedric in the bath and saw what happened when he put the egg under the water, and she, has been a character in the story before. And again, this is kind of what made me think back to the second book and the other times that she's come into the story. It's been when there's like a mystery, right, that concerns the entire school, where she is a well-known but unpopular person who is juxtaposed against these well-known and very popular figures. Well, Harry, in some cases, infamous, but at least everyone knows who he is, and turns out that sure enough he's the hero every time, right? So he kind of manages okay. But anyway, there's that kind of element of it, of her wanting to be close to life, close to beauty and living things, which were sort of taken away from her at a young age. She seems to be kind of arrested at the age at which she died. So all this kind of comes through in a little bit of a creepy way. But I think it's a pretty moving thing, actually, how much she wants to see these people do well, I guess.
I agree. And she's also obviously Hogwarts, right? She's pro Hogwarts. So she's still retained, even in her death, like many of those guests, her sort of partisan feelings for Hogwarts, even though she was obviously killed there and she could feel very differently. But two additional things you made me think of: the connection to the second book. In the second task specifically, you have a descent to an underworld with water involved, where there are amphibious reptile sort of creatures defending someone you care about that ostensibly will die if you fail to get them. And that recalls to me quite a bit of going into the Chamber of Secrets and getting Ginny Weasley and keeping her from being, consumed by the basilisk / the have her life force depleted by this this book. But I also wanted to ask whether, because one of, again, the global perspectives we've been looking at, our themes, is sort of the sharing of wisdom perspectives. We've even been talking about that some today. We've been talking about sort of seeing things from the journalistic perspective, or the ministry perspective, or the common wizard perspective, or the mixed blood wizard perspective, as opposed to the pure one. That's a lot of different perspectives swirl around here. And I wondered what y'all thought about the fact that part of this task is being able to understand that there are other perspectives than yours. What you have to do is take this egg, which is a symbol for the birth of a new idea or the birth of a new thing, and you put it in the water, which is not the medium you generally listen to. Usually things are muffled in the water. You don't see right in the water. You can't hear right in the water. But in the water here, that is the perfect medium for understanding this language. You literally have to take a new perspective even to understand what is happening here. It is almost like this task itself is a microcosm of the point of the Tri-Wizard Tournament, as well as the Quidditch World Cup, a sharing or a learning a new perspective in order to save someone who is valuable to you, which makes me think that that is precisely the problem with Rita Skeeter's journalism. That part of what a good journalist or information provider is they provide the information necessary for you to see a new perspective that makes you, I don't know, more robust in your world and more capable of saving those who might need saving in your life.
Yeah, well, to that point, it's like with Harry getting help from these people, the elf, right, who's so looked down upon by so many people, the elf helps him. Hagrid, who's half giant, okay, not a full giant, but still he's got giant blood in him, but he's like, one of the most trustworthy people, possibly like the most kind person in the whole book, right? And so there's something interesting that this task does involve yet another race that we haven't really experienced much with before, these mer people, introduced through art, as you point out, right, the picture on the wall or whatever it is. And then we see them up close, and they're quite terrifying, quite different from what we might be expecting, but apparently sentient and articulate, and they speak with Dumbledore. He kind of appeases them somehow, right? And so there's just this sense that there's still a lot more going on in this world than we know about. Probably Ron could tell us, oh, duh, like, mer people. Yeah, I knew about them this whole time. You didn't know there were mer people down there, right? But yeah, Ron doesn't seem too phased yet again. Like when he's rescued, he's like, oh, yeah. But so there's some interesting stuff going on there with, information and how it comes out. And I think part of what this task shows is that so much depends on the process of doing the task and not just the outcome of the task, right? Like you're describing with Rita Skeeter and her stories. If everyone could see what we see as readers of how she gets these stories, they might take a second look at what she's actually saying. So much of having that broader perspective is seeing a process and not just an outcome, or like a test. Part of what's so stressful about tests is that you sit there and you take it, and it doesn't really necessarily reflect the preparation you might have put in or the effort or any of that, right? You don't get to see anything but this little tiny snapshot, and it's the best we can do, sure, maybe, but there's a whole narrative there that's sort of left out of the picture.
And well, so what do you think about Harry's, so two additional pieces of information to consider in this situation. A, Neville's role in helping Harry figure out what was going on there. And I don't recall whether it was one of you who brought it up. I think it must have been one of you. Was it one of you that brought up the fact that Neville actually would have been very helpful in the very first task, because he was talking about some literature on levitating sorts of trees, which would have hipped Harry to the idea of his using his wand to get his wooden firebolt. I'm forgetting the term for broom. There we go, his broom. And then he, of course, suggests the gillyweed this time around. And then also just how Harry plays the game. I feel like it could almost be like a Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. Like it's too obvious that Harry is winning the game outside of the game. He's the true hero. in this situation. Perhaps the third task supports that idea. But what y'all thought of Neville's role and his help, and the help coming from the unlikely source, sort of like Hagrid in the first case, and also that Harry actually ends up not winning this task, even though he well could have if he had played the game, quote unquote, right.
The Neville thing, there's this little moment where Harry is so in his own thoughts that he steps in the invisible stair that Neville always misses, right? That little detail I noticed this time, that again sort of puts him in Neville's place, you know? They're in some sense, alter egos of one another. I don't know quite how far to go with that idea that, Neville has got sort of the answers, because he doesn't really realize that he's got the answers. So it's not quite the same. I obviously think Neville is the most important character in the book. And so I just would have to give it a little more time to see why that's the case in this situation.
Well, I think doesn't Dobby give him like the idea? I think this is on page like 490 or 491 that Dobby hands it to him, right? It looks like slimy grayish green rat tails. Oh, that's disgusting. Now that I read that out loud, that's pretty foul. But like, I mean, I think the question is the same, like that Harry's getting support from like seemingly non-champion like figures. Myrtle is dead. Dobby is crazy. Neville is, kind of considered a bumbling fool. And that, there's a limit to which Hermione and Ron are able to help him, right? I know maybe I missed the part where Neville gives them the tip. Was that in the library maybe? But I don't know. I think Alex, you asked like, what do we make of the fact that he doesn't win the task than he would have had he played it the right way? I don't know. I think that implies that there is one more right way. Crumb did everything right, and he didn't win either. I guess maybe his magic was like incomplete. I think it's like he used an incomplete form of some charm, but that he got the person back. None of them got back in the time allotted, and so in that sense, none of them did the game right. So I don't know. I feel like there's a just achievement of the task is, like you said, with your comment about the test, Wes, like achieving the task is important, but how you achieve the task is equally important. And I obviously, because of how he performed in the task, Harry is able to do better than had he performed in a different manner, but achieved the same thing, which was saving one, if not two. But yeah, I think like that just, like you guys said, requires a shift in perspective, that it assumes that games aren't only about, getting the trophy or, how, like winning the most points. I mean, I say this as the coach of a losing basketball team, but like, we have won 0 games, but we've gotten better. And that's not nothing. And I don't know. I think maybe that's part of the point, is that, an adjustment in your definition of what is true, or what is the one way to look at something, or that there's only one way to look at something, that seems to like open the possibility that there's more than one way to like skin a cat, or, win a battle, or all of that.
Well, it's interesting too to what extent skill and care play major roles in this task, because it is, of course, Fleur who is closest to her sister. She has the closest relationship of anybody there. Cedric to essentially his girlfriend, Cho. Victor, same, his girlfriend. Hermione-ish. And also Harry, Ron, who is his closest friend. But then Fleur, the one who fails this, and I wondered why you thought this was it a technical error on her part? Was it because she cared too much about the task and could not perform? Or was there even an added element that what it takes to be to get through the task of life, if we take the Triwizard Tournament as sort of what life can throw at you and the consequences of it, is it that it's not enough to care a lot, that you also need skill, that you need skilled good people like Harry to pick up the slack when say you fall, and that's part of the value of being part of a society in which people are highly skilled and capable.
I suppose there's an element of it being contrived here too, though. In this case, I think that Harry is acting on the belief that if he doesn't, be the hero, then these people will actually, die or be seriously hurt or something. So he's a little bit, I guess, taking the game, with due seriousness, but there's maybe an element of him not fully trusting the organizers to step in if things get too dangerous, right? So there's a fine line there, I guess, and his behavior again is noble, and it sort of changes the way that Fleur looks at him, right? So there's that element which is sort of outside of the game entirely, but seems like what the game is really for, as you're saying, right, is like developing these relationships across borders, from different schools, from different species even. And so that, in that sense, like, yeah, I mean, no matter how many points he gets, those kisses, I mean, come on, that's invaluable.
Well, and I want to ask about that because I think that's a really interesting point you're making. And I'd like to ask both of you, do you think it is Harry having due seriousness and having the heart of a champion and a hero that makes him get Fleur, or that this is still vestigial pride that we saw in the third book from him, sort of the, if I don't do it, well, I'm of course the only one that could do it. Is it an inflation on his part? So that is something I have a real question about. That's not a teacher question. Like, is he right not to trust the organizers, especially given what will happen later, and just what has happened in the past with the Triwizard Tournament and the fact that he knows that people have died, or is it? And it seems like you're sort of reading it a little bit in this way, Wes. Is he sort of just thinking that he is the only one because it is him, and he is the only one who, I don't know, even given all the evidence that he's obviously not in control, has to be the one in the control. But I guess there's even a third interpretation, which is in this situation, when it looks like only he can do something, is it right for him to do what it is that he does? Or is he foolish to do it and to not fully trust the game? Or I guess that's just the better way to ask the question.
Well, it's a tough question. It does seem to be one where you can really kind of interpret Harry in a few different ways here. I mean, frankly, I think part of it is that he cares really personally about 3 of the 4 people who are down there, right? So to take just one is asking a lot of him. And so I think there's that element of hesitation to go along with the ones you've enumerated. Again, it's like he trusts Dumbledore implicitly, right? But on the other hand, when you're actually like under the lake and you see these 3 people and this other person who are helpless that you care about, well, it's pretty hard to just, coldly play the game.
I think what you're putting your finger on there is what he didn't see when he won the Quidditch World Cup, even though Buckbeak was going to be killed and he got a note about that. That what he seems to be seeing here, which might suggest growth in character buildings, Roman, is that he does see something outside the game. He doesn't just play the game within the game, but also the game outside the game in the way that he failed to do when he won the Quidditch World Cup, though we thought that was a bit of a hollow victory, given that his best friend was about to lose this creature that he was at fault for having, that was going to be executed due to him exposing it to the children. Hagrid showing Buckbeak to Malfoy that then led to that situation. But okay, I have a big time wizarding question for both of you to conclude on now. This might be a tough one, but I think it's going to be a lot better than the last one. So here it is. Second task. You come from any of the 3 schools we see here. Part A of the question. Who is it that in your life who you would not expect, who gives you the information necessary to help you here? Who is your Dobby? Who is your Neville? And then second question. Who is it at the bottom of the lake for you?
That's a good question.
I know, I asked it not knowing the answer myself. Always a dangerous sort of question to ask.
Yeah, and you're putting us on the spot here. Are we talking about like in life or in like a specific task? Like are you talking about like if we were in the second task,
yes,
who would be at the bottom?
Yes, exactly. And who would help you to figure out, so maybe you can just do one of those because those are 2 very difficult choices all at once, but perhaps that's how life is. Throws 2 very difficult choices at you all at once frequently.
Gosh.
Well, I can say,
I don't know. Any ideas, Wes?
I mean, I think my wife would be down there at the bottom, and to get the hint to go look for her, I don't know, maybe like a neighbor or somebody I sort of talked to, but not a whole lot sort of thing, you know, that they've got wisdom, but I don't necessarily always recognize it very well.
Yeah, and I was thinking personally myself, it would be my girlfriend at the bottom. And but then the person who would give me information, I'm thinking of a very particular student who's missed the last 7 homework assignments. And many of his teachers, you know, there are many conversations about how to set this person straight and have him use his abilities in a way that is salubrious to him and the community. And so I think often he is seen in a very particular Nevillian way. He is seen for the negatives that he has started to embrace. But I think precisely because I would not expect something excellent to come from him immediately, though he's of course very much capable of producing that it would be him, at least in how my current life is if I were subjected to the second task. He would be very much, he's somebody I'm pulling very much for, sort of like how you're pulling for Neville, Wes, but he would definitely be an unexpected source of information, like a Dobby or a Moaning Myrtle or a Neville.
Yeah, I don't really know how to answer the first part of the question, but I was definitely going to say a student would definitely be, like, to me, Dobby like pops up at really inconvenient times, but always has like a useful piece of information or at least a source of entertainment and delight. Like he takes such delight in the world and things that most people just find mundane. He's like really in awe of. And I think kids do that really well, and I think more adults should. So I would probably get information, like an important piece of information from a student. I don't know who would be at the bottom. Probably, I don't know. I can't answer that.
All right. Well, hopefully it doesn't just happen so that you figure it out on the fly. All right, y'all. Well, that was excellent. That's a tough question too. So I'm really impressed with y'all being able to, I mean, it is very interesting when you're asked questions, not about your knowledge, but about what you care about. It does seem to be a little bit more difficult, at least for me, to sift through that. I, of course, have my canned answers that I give to everything. But when I have to really feel it out, it's not so easy. It's delicate. It's interesting. So for next time, y'all, I see 27, Padfoot Returns, 28, The Madness of Mr. Crouch, and 29, The Dream. Do you all think that, should we go to 30, The Pensieve, or stop at 29? How do y'all feel about that?
I mean, The Dream and The Pensieve are really closely related. So I feel like if we could, that would be a good idea.
Okay. Wes?
Yeah, I remember the pensieve being pretty cool, so I'd like to see that for next time as well. And then that'll give us kind of the last chunk of the book to do for the
Excellent.
panel.
Excellent. Well,
Yeah, there's a lot about like fatherhood and different kinds of paternal figures and growing up here. So.
well, that'll be helpful for all of us, that's for sure. And well, y'all, I appreciate you teaching on this day when you did not have to be teaching. And as usual, it's always wonderful to have these conversations with both of you. They're only getting better. Just as Hermione, Ron, and Harry are becoming closer and closer and knowing each other better as they develop, I feel like quite the same is happening with us. And so this continues to be wonderful, better each time.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
All right, well.
All right.
Until next time.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Happy Martin Luther King Day.
Happy Martin Luther King Day. Cheers, y'all. Clank.
Cheers. Clink, clink.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.